The Digital Operational Resilience Act is new regulation within the European Union aimed at enhancing the resilience of financial entities against cyber threats and other operational risks. If your business is directly affected by DORA, you'll already be aware of your need to demonstrate resilience. But resilience is critically important for all industries, so even if your business isn't in financial services, you can still gain a lot of benefits by following DORA principles. DORA is structured around 5 pillars: risk management, incident reporting, resilience testing, third-party risk management, and information sharing. At Node4, we're working with a range of clients who rely on us to advise them on their requirements and work with them to implement change. If you're affected by DORA, we can help you demonstrate compliance. But whatever your business, Node4 can help you become more resilient, more risk-aware, and more capable of defending against threats. The first pillar is risk management. This is about having a good awareness of what risks you need to manage, producing policies and procedures to identify, assess, and mitigate those risks. Monitoring and alerting is a critical part of this, and it's a service Node4 provides through our SOC and SIEM managed services. We can work with you to put appropriate risk management frameworks in place. Our specialist teams provide monitoring and vulnerability management, implementing appropriate controls to mitigate potential threats and respond to incidents. The second pillar is incident reporting. Sadly, it's not possible to talk about if your business systems will come under attack. It's a question of when. All businesses are targets for ransomware, data theft, and other cyber crimes. So it's essential that you're prepared to respond to incidents when they happen. DORA requires regulated companies to document any ICT-related incidents in a timely fashion and report them to the relevant authorities. But even if you're not mandated to report incidents, it's excellent practice to do so. This helps us learn from incidents and revise policies and practices to adapt to changing threats. Node4 can help you write runbooks and put the right roles and responsibilities in place to ensure that you can respond quickly and effectively to any incident. Pillar 3 is digital operational resilience testing. This is about demonstrating a regular cycle of testing, so penetration testing, vulnerability assessments, and other types of resilience tests. Again, this is all about attempting to be aware of risks and issues early enough to do something about them. Node4 can run incident scenarios, exercises where we simulate a cyber attack. We work with you to role-play how an incident might unfold and help you get comfortable with incident response so that you're not having to do this for the first time under the pressure of a real incident. Pillar 4 is about third-party risk management. This is about building awareness of the whole ecosystem of suppliers and vendors that you're working with to select, develop, implement, and manage your technology estate. You're only as strong as your weakest point, so your risk and resilience approach needs to cover everyone involved in your technology operations. It's about ensuring that everyone involved is working to the same risk frameworks, undertaking due diligence with new suppliers, regularly monitoring them, and putting contractual provisions in place to make sure that you're managing and mitigating the risks involved with working with third parties. The fifth and final pillar is information sharing. This final pillar emphasises the importance of information sharing amongst financial entities, regulatory bodies, and other stakeholders. The idea is that it's in all of our interests to share information about the threats we're experiencing and help everyone be stronger against attack. Financial entities must participate in information sharing initiatives as part of their DORA obligations. But at Node4, we'd encourage all companies to be open about cyber risk, sharing their learnings and best practices. We are a stronger society and economy by coming together to protect against cybercrime. So, in conclusion, whether or not you're obligated to comply with this new legislation, DORA is a very sensible framework for all businesses to deal with cyber risk. Node4 can help you understand your risks, put frameworks and policies in place, and work with you to implement modern technologies so that you're well prepared to face the ever-changing threats facing you.
about resilience as part of this webinar between Node4 and Fortinet for the FSIs. This couldn't have been more timely as I think it was last week or so. The Bank of England and the other regulators, the PRA and the FCA, just launched a policy statement regarding the critical third parties, and this is just part of the entire ecosystem that is trying to improve the resilience of the sector. So this couldn't be more timely. Let's get started, as it's going to be a very brief session for around 8 or so minutes. So, already discussed, resilience is a big topic for FSIs, right? For this brief presentation, what I would like to discuss is we should start with risk. Why risk? Because as you know, within major organizations, and especially in highly regulated industry, risk is the major driver that think about the wage. If we want to go very fast, innovate a lot, we also need to be careful because there's a balance to be achieved, and this is where the risk comes in, and the risk is like the brakes where we hit that. So from my perspective, there's three main drivers pushing this risk ecosystem. The first main driver is obviously the technology. The unprecedented number of changes that is happening in technology is just mind-boggling, especially with Gen AI, that it's growing. There's a big hype behind it, but nonetheless, as technology becomes more complex, the risk also increases. Secondly, the connectivity, especially, excuse me, in retail banking and other types of bankings where there's the payments, the liquidity, the loans. There's a lot of moving parts within the ecosystem, so the connectivity between them is also key. So number one, there's this thing called systemic risk that also gets bigger as connectivity increases, but more importantly is also the threats. As more things get online, more IoT, more manufacturing lines, more retail, more wearables, more everything get online, there's also a big risk of breaches, and also due to the exponential growth of the technology with Gen AI also makes phishing campaigns much more effective, and also from lower the barrier to entry to new attackers. It also brings those new people in and lets them start doing nefarious activities much more quickly. And lastly, the globalization. From a globalization perspective, my only point is that we still live in a globalized world. There's interlocked supply chains, and that's why I was saying from this critical third-party providers, it's a main topic that the FSIs are trying to address, not just from the contractual perspective and a business continuity management plan, but also from a software perspective. And we all seen the XZ vulnerability and what happened there. So that's also manifestation of those third-party providers and how they interact with the rest of the ecosystem. Nonetheless, these three risk drivers also make sure that the countries, the nations also set up regulations in practice, and this is something that we are going to be discussed furthering. So, not with a technology focus, but with an agnostic focus, I decided to bring some key stats from the internal auditors, right? And if you look at the key 5 top risks that auditors are facing, you'll see that cybersecurity is number 1, as expected. Then there's the talent, the regulations in number 3, digital disruption coming in number 5 within AI. But nonetheless, for me, cybersecurity being the top of head of this internal auditors signifies something. Now jumping on the resilience. And my proposition is that resilience is a balancing act between the costs, because from a financial perspective, since the great financial crisis, the regulators are trying to limit those supply shocks, right? So there's concerns about what might come, and there's a lot of frameworks like the Basel that try to limit those shocks and try to have macroprudential rules in order to limit that. Secondly, I really love this remark from the former governor of Bank of Spain, which is the first sentence: financial stability is considered a precondition for price stability, right? If we have financial stability, we'll have price stability. And this just highlights how important financial institutions are for the society. Nonetheless, this cost has been hanging over our heads for the last 2 years or so. We've seen a lot of layoffs in a lot of companies, especially in the last period within Germany, in their automotive industry, in the tech sector, and so on. But because I also feel that the boards and the management board of the organizations are trying to limit the costs, and that's where AI is trying to be assessed if the return of investment in order to make substantial savings is there. The second pillar of that balancing act is also the technology. Europe has been trying to do that also from a financial institution. There's been the IMF trying to improve the cyber resilience perspective. And lastly, the PS 1624 from the operational resilience series on the critical third parties from the Bank of England and the other regulators. From a societal perspective, not going to dwell too much on this. This is what Europe is doing from an NIS2 DORA perspective, right? But if you see here, everybody from the EU, Hong Kong, Singapore, UK, US are trying to improve this operational resilience to the ICT services, right? If you look at the PS 1624 that we just discussed, the requirements are very much aligned to the governance, to the dependency, mapping, incident management, and so on. So this is where I wrap up and talk a bit about perspective. Obviously, this is just brought as a teaser. Obviously, we would love for you to engage with us so that we can also dwell deeper in some of these topics. So the first perspective is regarding cost, right? Consolidation is a big focus. And my argument is that Fortinet, from a Fortinet perspective, there's a big focus on this convergence from a platform perspective. And why is that important? Because firstly, from a total cost of ownership, it optimizes. And as you enable more features on those platforms, the delta between the beginning state and the end state, you're going to see massive savings, even though the investment is going to be slightly higher when you enable some of those features, but the savings are going to be big because you're saving in complexity, you're saving in skill set, and obviously you're converging different tools in order to have a central policy engine, a central dashboard, and so on. But most importantly, if we talk about with the CFO and the financial controller, resilience, as we heard, is a precursor of financial stability, right? If my organization wants to have resilience, then the financial stability is also part of that. Perspective number two, we need to move more into a cyber reactive posture. That means that as we move forward, we need to understand that the traditional methods of keeping the crown jewels in the middle, we will put security around us, doesn't work. Today, the data is the new oil. Data is much more malleable than today. So we need to have new methods such as SASE, the data loss prevention in order to limit that. Secondly, it's all about zero trust. So we need to make sure that we follow that concept. We have some accelerators that we can plug into the organizational journey in order to make sure that we can accelerate that. But like I said, it's a journey. And microsegmentation should be the natural precursor to data and how we limit exposure and the blast radius from events. Thirdly, it's all about playbooks, meaning that if something bad happens, we immediately have a playbook, we have automation in place that's gonna quickly spin up something. For example, in incident response, if we detect some kind of compromise or a honeypot being hit, we need to quickly understand and build our defenses around that so that we can learn more from that threat, right? As you can see here in the bottom right corner, My preferred metrics for this type of reactiveness is the MTTD, the mean time to detect and the mean time to respond, because I feel that it's more associated with the resilience, because it's about detection and response. Lastly, as you can see, the BCM, three-letter acronyms, who doesn't love them? But it's more about the business continuity management plan. All the resilience efforts have a big focus on it. We within Fortinet and our partners as Node4, we are committed to this. And within the Gartner Magic Quadrant, we have won this 5 times in a row on the SD1 Gartner Magic Quadrant for SD1. But you might say, what does SD1 has to do with it? At the core, it's traffic engineering with security overlay on top. So when you have stress or non-stress exits, this is where you need some kind of SD1 tool in order to pivot from one environment to another. And finally, AI. I think everybody's a bit tired of the AI hype. I'm just saying that we are committed. We have enormous data from our FortiGuard labs, and we have good solutions that fulfill the regulatory practice regarding data masking and making sure that large language models don't have access to proprietary or confidential or PI data. So to wrap it up, I would just say that technology is part of the equation. There's also a big part that should focus on the people, elevating that cyber brand, right? And this is something that we can also discuss further, which I'm an author on the policy design if you want to create a security champions program, or how do we make sure that the organization succeeds in elevating that cyber brand. This is something that we can also help within Fortinet. We also have some accelerators like our NSE Institute, which is free of charge. So think about that. And this is just an example on how a policy can be set up and then the different levers in order to actually execute this. For example, if you're talking about suasion or statistical instruments, this is just one big part of the puzzle. But nonetheless, thank you for attending. We are more than willing to discuss further. I hope that this was informative. I know it was short, but nonetheless, feel free to reach out to your partners and to ourselves or to myself in order to get further insights. Thank you so much.
In today's business landscape, our greatest digital asset, information, can also be considered our greatest vulnerability. The first line of defense to safeguard our information from threats is our security operations teams. And one of the main sources of fuel for the SOC is threat intelligence. This presentation will take a look at how threat intelligence has changed to adapt to the needs of the modern SOC. Before we take a look at the modern SOC, let's understand what Fortinet's background is in threat intelligence. So FortiGuard Labs was founded around 2002, and it's pretty much less the back-end engine room of all our threat intelligence. If you have a Fortinet product that you're using today, the signature updates, the databases update, and the threat intelligence notifications that they receive are all pushed out from FortiGuard Labs. And obviously Fortinet have a wide range of products and technologies spanning from the kernel level of the operating system with something like FortiEDR, all the way up to public and private cloud workloads with something like CNAPP, and in between you can have anything from a FortiGate firewall to a FortiSandbox to a FortiDDoS solution. But despite us having a wide range of products and receiving that telemetry and metadata from the products into FortiGuard, we don't see ourselves as the one and only silver bullet in cybersecurity. We pair with a lot of government agencies. We do a lot of work in regards to open standards with the likes of NIST and the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and even with our most fiercest competitors. We founded the Cyber Threat Alliance. So around 2014, the Cyber Threat Alliance was formed, and around, I think it was 2017, there was an actually hard technical threat sharing database that was kind of put in place by Fortinet, Palo Alto, Checkpoint, McAfee, and Symantec, where on a monthly basis, vendors had to actually submit a certain quality of samples to retain membership with the CTA and actually then share that threat intelligence. The Cyber Threat Alliance has grown massively, and a very wide and large number of other vendors have actually joined the Cyber Threat Alliance. So, despite us being Fortinet, a very large cybersecurity vendor that produces and manages our own threat intel, we work very closely with our peers and within the industry space as well. So now let's take a look at how security operations teams traditionally use threat intelligence to protect our digital assets. So protecting our digital assets against threat actors is the name of the game. How do the security operations teams use threat intelligence to actually then repel the threat actors? So typically what happens is a security operations team or an organization will select a handful of threat intelligence providers. And like I said, with FortiGuard Labs, we produce threat intelligence and database and signature updates that are automatically pushed out. When we're talking about IOCs and threat intelligence, what organizations and SOC teams are looking to do is work with the threat intel provider to provide them with little fragments of emerging threats that are currently taking place to try and understand if their organization or their digital assets are potentially at risk from any of the emerging threats. So what typically has happened is, like I said, the SOC team will select a threat intelligence provider or a small number of select threat intelligence providers and receive IOCs from the threat intel provider into their threat intelligence platform. And then it's the SOC teams, or it has been the SOC team's responsibility to then manage that tip, the threat intelligence platform, and try to understand if any of the IOCs that are being fed from the threat intelligence providers are actually relevant to their data in transit or data at rest within their organization. And if it is, that information that needs to be disseminated within the organization at a strategic, tactical, and operational level. So, that's quite a heavy and quite a time-consuming task for our massively overloaded SOC teams. So over time, we've seen the tip be absorbed by SIEM and SOAR platforms. So SIEM and SOAR platforms offer fantastic correlation and an excellent layer of automation, but still, the concept of actually receiving the IOCs into some sort of receiving platform and then trying to actually make sense if there is any mapping of those IOCs with your digital transactions and then extracting that data and feeding it so it can be actionable within the organization is quite a heavy task. So it's all, like I said, it's a heavy task that's traditionally proved quite challenging for the SOC teams to manage. We know our SOC teams and security operations teams are massively overloaded. So now if you put that into the context of what we're seeing digitally happening in the kind of threat world, so not only is it about IOCs now, social media monitoring, phishing websites, dark web monitoring, brand protection, these are all, highly intensive tasks and something, that's not necessarily readily available from the IOC feeds. So more and more we're finding that the IOC feeds, I wouldn't say they're not fit for purpose, but in the scope of the attack surface, digital attack surface, they're only kind of covering a small part. And with overloaded SOC teams, like I said, when it comes to actually like breach forum monitoring, dark web monitoring, brand protection, social media, phishing website protection, C-level staff monitoring, these are tasks, that from a threat intel point of view are really heavy on SOC teams. So what we're finding is more and more that responsibility is actually being offloaded by the modern SOC. So I'll just build this slide out. So on the left-hand side, what we've seen now is an evolution of threat intelligence where SOC teams are actually saying, well, that responsibility of dark web monitoring, C-level staff monitoring, brand protection, social media monitoring, it's such a behemoth task. A normal threat intel feed won't actually cover that. And we need actually support from a specialist vendor or a specialist threat intel provider to do that whole responsibility for us. And it's not just about, receiving IOCs into a data lake. If we actually then have a look, from on the top left-hand side, contextualized threat intelligence and digital risk protection platforms like FortiRecon, that is something that they specialize in, and that really allows the SOC teams to actually focus on pre-breach kind of scenarios. We see it time and time again when we hear of these massive data breaches that happened with an organization. A recent one that's actually happened is the Transport for London in the summer of 2024, where personal PPI information was then kind of exposed, and it had lots of ramifications on the digital supply chain, as well as a lot of regulatory potential issues as well. But that breach, even with something, had huge parallels with the Colonial Pipeline breach, in that there were both breaches that were that stemmed from a not necessarily a data breach. It was credentials that were sold on the dark web, and there were credentials for a layer 3 VPN. So obviously, once you have the non-MFA protected, username and password for a layer 3 VPN. Once you actually connect, you can do whatever you want. So, you know, if you had something, or if these customers potentially had something like FortiRecon that was actually monitoring the dark web for their credentials being sold, you know, there is a very strong possibility that a breach could have been prevented, or certainly that attack vector of the breach could have been prevented if there was an emphasis placed on contextualized threat intelligence instead of just raw IOC feeds that was specializing in the whole kind of attack surface monitoring rather than just IOC specialization. So, you know, like I said, within the context of the modern SOC, we've seen threat intelligence now evolve from just being raw IOC feeds into this kind of whole contextualized understanding of the organization as a digital asset from the outside looking in. And this is something that, you know, is going strength to strength in the cybersecurity space. And this is something that we anticipate is going to be, we're going to see more and more developments in the future. So I hope you found that useful. Please get in contact if you have any questions.